Today I'd originally planned to look at the idea of corporate greed and how ridiculously easy it can be to sell one's soul to it without even realising. But instead I've decided to look at heroism and unity and the real-world version of selling one's soul to corporate greed that is the comic book movie genre. Yes, this is Justice League, and here is your spoiler warning. If you proceed past this point, I'll assume you've either seen it or you simply don't care. So 37% on Rotten Tomatoes. It's not a perfect film, I will concede, but I don't think that that is a good reflection. I think that is far too low, and I stand by Jason Momoa's response to Backlash that this is a film for fans. But, that said, that's also one of its flaws. If you already know the characters, you already know the setting, which, to be honest, yes, is going to make up a large percentage of the audience, then you can follow along and you know what happened, you know the backstory, but it doesn't delve really deeply into the ones that we haven't already seen. Obviously, we've seen Batman's backstory numerous times, we've seen a good amount of attempts at Superman, we've seen the Wonder Woman film, hopefully before going into this, but we haven't really, unless you watch the Arrowverse kind of CW shows, you haven't really perhaps got a good understanding of people like Cyborg, The Flash, etc., who may come down the line. And like I say, I think that's one of its flaws. As a fan, you know these people, you know who Arthur Curry is, you know his backstory, you know that Amber Heard is Mira without having to look it up on IMDb, because you know the context. You know the situation with Barry Allen and what happened to his mom and how he became who he is, but in the movie these things are very brief, if even touched on at all. We know that lightning was involved. We know from previous entries in this franchise that, the Mother Box helped create the body for Cyborg. But we haven't had their own stories. Now, I know that there are films down the line that will probably flesh these out, but they haven't followed the MCU's idea of doing that first, before bringing everyone together as much as possible. And arguably, yes, it does suffer, I think, for it, particularly with, critics or just general public members. But it's fun. The problems with the other entries so far were that they were grimdark, they had the Zack Snyder slow-mo catchphrase, if you will, inside them all over the place. They're a bit too sprawling, whilst not giving really information that we needed to know, more information that, we could have got away without knowing in some cases. And most people's problem, I think, though, was the tone. It was too dark, too grim, too gritty. Whereas here we've got Bruce Wayne cracking jokes. I mean, we've probably all seen in the trailer, when Ezra Miller as the Flash says, "What are your superpowers again?"
I'm rich.
Which could also be levelled at Tony Stark, of course, as Iron Man, but, this is a different Batman to the last time we saw him. This is a massive tonal shift, and I guess there is an element of me that says, well, Joss Whedon involvement, it does make sense. Even whilst watching, I was drawing the parallel between Xander and the Flash. They're both the awkward young members of the team, self-confessed snackholes in at least one of their cases, but it would apply to the other. And they are the most outwardly terrified of everything. But when the going gets tough, they pull their weight, they go into the fray with everyone else, they exhibit true courage, you might say. Because it's all well and good saying I'm not afraid of anything, but the truly courageous act despite their fear. And yeah, you could draw parallels across different characters, I'm sure, like Giles and Alfred as the wise leader behind the scenes. But it is just indicative, I think, of, Whedon's voice, if you will. It was naturally going to come out that certain parallels would be drawn from earlier works, it's just logical, really. Even the fact that Batman's kind of quipping every so often is an indication of Whedon's tone. And it does pick up, I think, the levity that was begun, at least a little in part, in Wonder Woman. So I think it was a good follow-up for that. But I think it could have done with elaborating certain points. We don't get all the information, and the information that we do get is often very quick. It's not spent much time on, which, yes, has its benefits. It means that it's not going to drag. It could have been a 3-hour film if everything was elaborated on. But this is where the MCU idea of setting everything up first was a good idea, because you're not having to explain everything in one ensemble piece. So yes, it's not without its flaws, and I haven't even touched on Steppenwolf yet. That was an interesting one for me, with Kieran Hines voicing the character. I thought he did a great job. He brought the right level of menace and egotisticalness, really, narcissism. But again, his origins, his backstory, he mentions Darkseid very briefly once, that he wants to be one of the new gods. But there's not much elaboration, and really this is his film, you could argue, as much as anyone else's. It's the film that he's the bad guy in. And we get the stories of the Mother Box, etc., but it's not super elaborated on. I think this is what a lot of people's problem is. The stuff that could have been explained wasn't as much as it should have been. Again, going back to Momoa's point about this is for the fans. I know Steppenwolf's character, I know Darkseid, I know his links, I know about the Mother Box, I know the Parademons, etc., etc. But looking at it, imagining I'm someone who doesn't, I could come out of this very confused still. Even though half of the characters I've been told who they are in detail, another sort of quarter of the characters I've been given at least a bit of information on, and then some characters, this is my first introduction. I don't think it handled everything as well as it could. But I think it's not so much a step in the right direction, perhaps more a stumble in the right direction. Coming off the back of this, if they tweak it so that they're not being super slow in setup like previous entries, but not glossing over things too much like this has, they could really challenge the MCU. And particularly as things are getting cagey over that side of the fence, they may be able to pick up the slack and really get some momentum going so they can fill the void whilst Phase 4 is figured out. But I stand by my earlier point. 37% is too low. It could have elaborated on more, but it's an enjoyable film. If you've got even half an interest in DC, I wouldn't say I'm a DC super fan, and I was still able to follow everything because I knew these characters. I enjoyed the actors in the roles, great casting, obviously some of them had already been done well in advance, but I think it did well. I enjoyed it for what it was. Hopefully there will be an extended version on Blu-ray and DVD, etc., and that will fill in some of the blanks, kind of like the definitive edition or the ultimate edition, whatever it was called, of Batman v Superman. I forgot to look that up. Bad me. But, I hope that we get some more clarity and further entries into the series, continue this, and keep the DCEU on the right track. I'm really optimistic, more than I was at the end of BVS, let's put it that way. So until next time, as always, take care.